Today I'm making a tier list based on how enjoyable it is to play against different enemy tops. It's not necessarily who I think is overpowered or too weak. It's not about how easy it is to win lane or win game against them. It's more just how much fun do I have when I'm up against these enemies. So the tiers go from delete this champ, where I don't care if I'm winning or losing, I'm not having fun if this enemy is in the game, up to peak fun, where I don't think they're that hard to play against, but I still feel rewarded when I do make an outplay. The other tiers are free, where it's honestly just too easy. Think like Nasus in lane. You're not going to lose. And it's just not as much fun because it's honestly too easy. Then there's the feels fair champs, where most top laners probably end up. These are ones where, sure, there's going to be bad matchups where you feel like there's nothing you can do. But in general, if I'm playing the average champion in my champ pool and I'm up against one of these, I think it mostly comes down to who's the better player in that game. And then there's the not a good time. These aren't the delete this champ type enemies, but they are usually, there's not a lot of counterplay. I just feel like they're too safe or they do too much damage based on how much mobility they have, things like that. So let's get into it. The first champ I'm going to put in delete this champ tier is Yorick. I don't trust my jungler to come top without dying to him. I feel like 30 seconds alone in lane and my tower is gone, and he hits you with one thing, and then you're out of commission for the next 10 seconds or longer. It's incredibly frustrating to play against him. I'm not saying that I don't think I can beat him. I probably have a 50% win rate against him, but it's just not fun at any point. Early game, late game, I'm never enjoying myself against Yorick. The next champ, ChoGath, I'm going to put him in feels fair. If you dodge a CC, you don't die. So it's on him to make plays. It's on you to mess up. It just feels right. He doesn't do too much damage. Darius, I'd say, is not a good time, mostly because of how strong his early game is, but a little bit because later in the game he can sometimes 1v5. My main problem is that early game, you can be playing almost any champion and he can zone you off the wave. You can't get in any kind of extended fight with him, to the point that sometimes you have to give up a ton of CS early, and I don't really find that fun. As for Akshan, I don't really know how to say his name. I'm also going to put him in not a good time, mostly for the ranged factor. He has a lot of mobility. He can poke you nonstop, and he's got a ton of ability to gank your teammates, get fed off of other lanes. It feels like things are less in your control when you're against him. Renekton's going to be my first champion for peak fun. He's a lot of fun because he feels fair and somewhat easy to play against, but it's not like you just roll over him. He has a ton of ability to make big plays happen, but I also think that getting counterplay against him feels really good and rewarding. I'd say the same thing about Sett. I think that Renekton and Sett play pretty similarly in that once they get on you, they can do a ton of damage. So it's up to you to make sure that that doesn't happen. Then I'm going to put Shen as my first champion in the free tier. I think I just have a good time playing against him. Maybe I haven't seen a good Shen, but I like that lane a lot. And late game, I don't think he has a lot of carry potential. He's able to save people, but I don't think he's going to turn the game around on his own. Quinn, I'm putting in feels fair. I think the main difference between Quinn and Akshan is that she doesn't have nearly as much mobility. And I know that sounds weird because her ult is run 1100 movement speed, but when you're in combat with her, she has her one knockback to disengage. She has her blind, but that's it. She doesn't have a huge get away fast ability. So I feel like she's pretty fair. Once you get on her, she's going to die. Then Sion, I also think feels fair. This is one of those champs where, sure, if you pick the wrong champ into Sion, you don't have. There's not much you can do about him late game, but in general, I think he's pretty fair. Riven, I'm gonna say, is not a good time if you're up against a good Riven. Most of my experience is playing against Platinum and Emerald level players, so I think at that point they've got the mechanics down, and I find her pretty tough to play against. She has so much damage, and seems like she doesn't have cooldowns. I'm gonna put Warren in the free tier. It doesn't feel that good to outplay him, and maybe my champ pool is specifically all really good against Ornn, especially Fiora, because he can never ever use CC on you. But I think he's too easy. If you get to hyper late game, then sure, he upgrades all of his teammates, and then the game's really hard. But it doesn't feel unfair to me. I put Garen in the peak fun tier. I thought about putting him in free tier, but I think Garen's pretty easy to outplay, and when you do outplay him, you feel good. It doesn't feel like you're beating up on a support. He does a lot of damage. He's got some mobility, but in general, he's got a pretty low skill ceiling. So even a really good Garen isn't gonna outplay me mechanically most of the time, although they might have better macro. Camille for me goes in not a good time. It doesn't matter who I pick. She does massive damage. She has huge true damage. She has a lot of mobility. She sets up great ganks for her jungler. I just feel like she does everything, and I really don't know why she has a normal win rate. Maybe I'm terrible at playing against her, but she feels too strong for me. Dr. Mondo feels fair. I don't think he does too much damage. I think if you itemize well against him, it's fine. He's not going to usually 1v5 your team. And I put Aatrox in feels fair as well, because everything he does is really telegraphed. Yeah, he's got a lot of damage. Yeah, he's got multiple knockups. But every skill he has, it feels like you have an opportunity to deny him what he's trying to do. Fiora, she's my most played champ. She's my favorite champ. I'm going to put her in feels fair. It's one of those matchups where if the Fiora is really good, she's going to win. If you play better than her, usually you're going to win. And yeah, there's champs where there's nothing you can do about Fiora, but in general, I think most of those end up being skill matchups. Gangplank's not a good time for me. I think most champs who can 1v5 are going to be in this not a good time tier. His ult can make their bot lane win, and then you just lose the game. He can Q you constantly. His barrels do massive damage. He's crit reliant, so they're just randomly you're going to lose 40% of your health, and randomly you're going to lose 20% of your health. There's too much randomness. There's too much helping bot for me there. I think Pantheon is probably peak fun. It seems like these Renekton, Sett, Pantheon, they all seem to play pretty similarly in that they have a bit of a gap closer, but it's not huge. Once they get on you, they want to do a lot of damage. They're definitely bruisers, and I think that's what I enjoy fighting against. Grogas, I think it's free. He loves to zoom around. He loves to have really, really low cooldowns, but I don't know. He just seems kind of like a meme to me. I'll put Kenshin feels fair, although I've seen some amazing Kenches and I've seen some terrible Kenches. The amazing ones are going to hit every single tongue lash, and you feel like, oh, wow, I thought I was behind minions, and that tongue went right through them. So sometimes they're really good, sometimes they're not. I think it's fair. And Teemo, I think, is kind of like Quinn in that, yeah, he's ranged, but I don't feel like it's abusive. Maybe if you're on a certain champ it is, but I think in general Teemo's actually pretty fair. You might have a tough time up until 6, but you can definitely beat him after that on most champs. Urgot's going to be not a good time for me because he does huge damage, he has massive resistances, and he can 1v5 late game. It feels like no matter how behind you put him, and I'm sure people are going to disagree with me, and that's fine, it feels to me like even when he's behind, he still smacks everybody late game. Poppy's going to be free for me. She's one of the highest win rate champions in the game, but I just don't see it. Maybe nobody in Plat or Emerald knows how to play her, but she just doesn't seem to. Maybe it's getting gold on her doesn't really change how effective she is. So I don't have a tough time against her. Tryndamere is going to feel fair. He, at one point, was one of the most hated champs in the game, as was Teemo. But, 30 new releases later, all the 200 years memes, he just feels like a really basic champion with one spin, one slow. It doesn't feel too tough to play against. I'm going to put Gwen in free. She may be good in pro play, but in solo queue, I see a lot of Gwens inting. I don't see them using their skills as they should. And I pretty much only play melee top laners, so I don't really mind the Gwen as immune part. Gnar, he feels fair. His damage is pretty low. I know he's got a lot of utility, but again, this isn't pro play. People aren't playing around as Meganar. He feels fair. And same with Irelia. Irelia is almost in not a good time because if she does get an early kill, she can 1v5. But that's really on me if I die to her. So I think if I'm playing well, I will beat Irelia. Singed goes in the free tier because he really is a meme. Like this again is going back 10 years, but there's just the don't chase Singed joke or rule. It's really both. And it just feels so funny. I think a good Singe should be above Platinum or Emerald because it's not really mechanics based. It's all about your macro. And maybe people just don't have that in the elo I'm in. But I find Singe to be free. I find Jace to be free as well. Maybe it's NA Jace, maybe it's solo Q Jace, but they tend to jump in and die. I can't think of the last time I've lost to a Jace. Jax feels fair for me. He could be in not a good time. He's kind of leaning that way, but I think that there is counterplay. Most champs at this point have a way to play back against his counter strike, and that's the main thing for him. There's also the factor that if you disappear for a minute, your tower's gone, but there's so many champs like that at this point. I'm going to put Kale in free. I know that she scales, but lately I've even been beating some Kales late game. It's not all about winning, but I feel like there's so much counterplay against Kale. It's so easy to beat her early, and even late game, you have options like not running right into her. And she has no CC, so she's really just all damage late game. And I don't think that she's too weak. I just think that there's a lot of ways to play against her. Illaoi, on the other hand, is going to be the second champ and delete this champ tier because if my jungler comes top, he's running right into her ultimate and he's dying. I just want to say, don't ever gank Illaoi. I don't need it. I'll be up in gold. It'll be fine. But I'm not having fun because if she ever takes your soul, you pretty much have to base. She does too much damage. You can't fight her in her ult even if she's up, or even if you're up like an item and a half. So I don't think that she's overpowered. I just think that she's no fun to play against and should be deleted. I would put Kled in feels fair. If you dodge his abilities, you'll usually be fine. And he's got some cool moments where he remounts at 1 HP, and I don't have a problem with that. I think he's a cool champ design. I'm fine with him. Rumble, he's kind of tough to place because there's the good Rumbles and the bad Rumbles. So I would just say that he feels fair. If you're up against a good Rumble, he somehow hits every single tick of his Flame Spitter, and you're at 40% HP before you hit level 2. But I think he's fine. There's enough bad Rumbles to counteract that. Yone is going to be in not a good time. He's a lot like Irelia for me, where if you die the first time, it's your fault. and then he can 1v5, and that's your fault. But he just has so much mobility, so many dashes. Like, at least Irelia is limited to minions. If you're not in a minion wave, she's not going to dash 6 times and kill you. Yone, you could be walking to Rift Herald, he could be at his tower, and then half a second later, yes, that's an exaggeration, half a second later, he's killing you. Mordekaiser, not a good time. It's something about the Liandry's slow. Wait, no, Rylai's perma-slow, where you can't get away from him. He does huge damage. Ganks don't really work past 6 because of his ultimate. I think that there's not that much counterplay. Maybe it's my champ pool, but that's how I feel. This one might be my most controversial placement. I'm going to put Malphite in free. I know that if you're playing something like, I don't know, Tryndamere, Jax, Irelia, Garen, Darius, you should be losing to Malphite. But I almost feel like people who pick Malphite don't actually play Malphite, and they just choose him as a counter pick. So you're never up against that good of a Malphite. The Malphites I see are 0 mana 3 minutes into the game, and then they're just trying to last hit under tower. And it's not all about lane, but I find Malphites to be really free, even if he counters half of my champ pool. Maokai, I don't see too much of him anymore. I think he's pretty free. He's got a pretty cool kit, but it's just better suited for jungle and support at this point. Olaf, I would say probably peak fun. I guess he's another like bruiser juggernaut where I think he's just the best kind of champ to play against, because if you're beating him, you can really feel good about that. And if you beat him, he's not going to come back 5 minutes later in 1v5. Nasus is going to go in free. Even late game or mid game when he's got a lot of stacks, there's just so much you can do. Like, I think his kit is so simple that it's in your ability to outplay him. And K'Sante, I'm going to put in peak fun. I know that he has a terrible win rate. I'm not going to call him free because if he plays well, he's going to beat you. But in general, I enjoy going into K'Sante. I have fun against that. Sorry, Showmaker. And then Kennen's going to be the final champ. I'll put him in Feels Fair. He really goes with all of the range tops except for Akshan and Urgot. He feels fair to play against. He doesn't do too much damage for being ranged, and I think you have the ability to beat him if you play right. Late game, yeah, he can carry team fights, but so can most champs, so I'm fine with that. That's my tier list. Riot, if you're listening, I really care about the delete this champ tier. And thank you for watching.